Something massive just exploded in the Blake Lively case, and it could end everything. Wayfarer Studios just filed a motion that doesn't just fight back. It exposes everything from secret filings to leaked texts to contradictions in her own story. And if the judge agrees with this filing, Blake's entire lawsuit could collapse before it ever reaches trial. This isn't just another headline. This is the moment the whole Hollywood narrative starts to unravel. So besties, just when we thought this whole situation could not possibly twist any further, something happened that turned the entire Hollywood legal scene upside down again. Because the whispers, the filings, and the quiet courtroom maneuvers have all started to make sense now. And it looks like the move everyone has been waiting for has finally been played in this intense chess match between Blake Lively and Wayfarer and Baldoni and their teams of lawyers and experts. The shockwave that came from this judgment on pleadings filing has left even the most seasoned legal commentators completely stunned, because what this motion could do is something that very few people expected. It could erase almost the entire case, leaving only a simple disagreement over contracts, and not the wild retaliation claims that made headlines for months. And you can feel the tension rising as if the walls of Hollywood are closing in, while everyone from the media to the fans waits to see if this really is the move that changes. Everything this moment is like a storm rolling in over calm water, because everyone knows something massive is about to break, and the suspense is building by the second. What makes this so unbelievable is that it shows how every step of this battle was quietly preparing for this strike from the start. You can tell that the lawyers for Wayfarer were not reacting, but rather calculating, because a judgment on pleadings is not a simple procedural move. It is the kind of filing that shows total confidence in the weakness of the other side. It tells the judge we do not even need discovery or new evidence to prove our point, because even if every word in the complaint is true, it still fails to meet the law, and that is a massive statement of strength. It is like a declaration of war, made in total silence. And it's clear that they are betting everything on the fact that the complaint simply cannot stand on its own legs. And while that may sound technical, it is actually deeply dramatic, because the filing reads almost like a story, a slow dismantling of every argument that Blake Lively made. And when you read through it, it becomes clear that they are not just defending themselves. They are telling the judge that the law itself does not support her position. It is a stunning reversal that nobody expected. And it leaves her team in a situation that feels more like a trap than a defense. Because now they have to respond to a motion that does not even argue about what happened, but whether any of it even matters under the law. And this is the kind of moment that changes not just a case, but the entire perception of the players involved. And everyone knows that perception is everything in Hollywood. What adds another level of shock to this is how specific the filing is. It breaks apart every claim that was made about harassment, retaliation, and hostile work environment. And then it starts explaining why the state of California cannot even be applied to what happened. Since Blake is from New York and the movie was shot in New York and New Jersey, the lawyers point out that even in her own filings, she admits this. And that means under California law, those claims cannot move forward. It's like watching a carefully built wall collapse brick by brick as each legal argument falls away, and the silence that follows is deafening. Because if the judge agrees, the case could shrink to something so small that it would barely make a headline anymore. And yet everyone watching knows that behind that small legal shift are reputations, careers, and millions of dollars in contracts and brand value hanging in the balance. The suspense here comes from the idea that we are watching a story that has moved beyond scandal into strategy, and in that space, every decision counts. Because it is not about emotion anymore, it's about precision. It's about knowing the rules better than the other side and using them with surgical accuracy. The judgment on pleadings is like a blade cutting through the noise. And what it leaves behind is something so stripped down that even the media may have to rethink the narrative they've been building for months. And as the legal arguments unfold, something else becomes clear. The issue of retaliation, which has been the emotional core of this case, is now under attack in a way that feels devastating to the plaintiff's side, because the filing argues that she cannot show any direct link between her alleged complaints. And any negative actions against her, there's no timeline that fits, no concrete proof that connects one to the other, and that weakens the entire emotional power of her case. It's as if the air has been sucked out of the room. The drama shifts from outrage to uncertainty, and that uncertainty is the most powerful force in this story right now, because it makes people question everything they thought they knew about who was the victim and who was the aggressor. And as the legal details unfold, we see that they're not just saying she failed to show proof. They're saying that even if she had proof, it wouldn't matter, because she filed under laws that do not apply outside California, It is a technicality, but one that could end her claims entirely. And that's what makes this so shocking, because most people assumed that the case would go to discovery, that there would be witnesses, emails, text messages, and months of dirty laundry aired out in public. But now this move could shut it all down before any of that ever happens. And if that happens, it will not just be a legal victory, it will be a narrative victory, the kind that changes how everyone tells the story. Moving forward, think about it. The same outlets that once called this a landmark Hollywood harassment case might now have to report that the claims were dismissed not because of hidden evidence or mystery settlements, but because the filings themselves were flawed. And that's the kind of twist that no one saw coming. It's like a movie where the ending flips the whole plot upside down and suddenly everything looks different. Every interview, every leak, every headline starts to read differently in hindsight, and you can feel that shift starting already, because this filing does not just target the claims, it targets the credibility of the entire narrative that surrounded this story from the start. It's a way of saying to the court and to the public, this was never what it seemed to be, and if the judge agrees, that message will echo far beyond this courtroom and into the way Hollywood handles its internal disputes moving forward. And that's where the real suspense is, not just in whether Blake Lively wins or loses, but in what happens to the larger machine of celebrity image control when one of its brightest stars suddenly finds that the very laws meant to protect her might not apply to her situation at all. And as we move deeper into the motion, there's another twist that feels almost cinematic. It turns out that she may not have even properly filed against her actual employer, because she listed Wayfarer Studios and its executives, but not the production company that technically hired her. It ends with Us, LLC, and without naming them, the law says she cannot claim employment discrimination. It's a detail that sounds small, but it could dismantle entire sections of her case, because if you can't name the employer, you can't make the claim. And that's the kind of error that makes lawyers' jaws drop. It's like building a mansion without a foundation. It looks grand, but it collapses under its own weight. And what's even more suspenseful is that this very issue was something many commentators pointed out early on and were criticized for bringing up. But now the same argument is being made directly to the judge by Wayfarer's legal team, and the evidence is hard to ignore. It's like all the whispers were right, and now they've been turned into a legal weapon, and behind the polished legal language you can feel the undertone, the quiet message that says, this case should never have been this big, this public, this dramatic. And yet, here we are watching the pieces fall apart, and as if that wasn't enough. The filing also reveals something jaw-dropping that she's trying to seal. The very complaint she already shared with the New York Times, calling it confidential even though it's public. This contradiction alone could become a new flashpoint in the case, because it raises the question, why hide something you already made public? It creates a tension between public image and courtroom reality that makes the story even more electric and unsettling. Because if the judge questions that move, it could affect how much credibility her filings hold. And every lawyer knows credibility is everything in front of a judge. And as you read through these pages, you realize that this isn't just a fight over legal definitions. This is about control of a story. And once again, the story is slipping away from her side. It's almost poetic that in a case about narratives and image and perception, the final battle is over the legal equivalent of storytelling structure. Because if the structure fails, the story collapses, and that's exactly what Wayfarer's lawyers are aiming for. The entire strategy feels like an invisible storm, gathering momentum, quietly building power, and preparing to sweep away everything that was built on unstable ground. And as we reach this point in the unfolding drama, the energy around this case has completely shifted. The confidence from her side is starting to waver. The certainty that this would be a public reckoning is giving way to doubt and unease, and you can feel. And as this motion keeps unfolding, it becomes more and more obvious that Blake Lively's legal team might have underestimated how prepared Wayfarer was to strike back. Because this isn't just a dry legal document, it reads like a dismantling of an entire public narrative. And what's wild is how calculated this timing feels. This filing didn't come out of nowhere. It landed right after Blake's team pushed for the court to seal documents and delay discovery, which now looks like a desperate attempt to buy time before this hit. And the irony is brutal, because while she was out there painting herself as being silenced by a powerful studio, this document flips it completely. It shows a pattern of her filing media complaints and sealed motions at the same time to control both the courtroom and the headlines. And when you read through the Wayfarer filing, it's almost like they're talking directly to the judge, but also to the public. They're saying, look, we've been quiet, we've been patient, but here are the facts, and that calm tone makes it hit even harder. Because while Blake's filings have been emotional and dramatic, this one is cold and surgical. It focuses on precision, not passion, and that's often the kind of tone that wins in court. Now, one of the most interesting parts of this motion is how it exposes the contradictions in her claims about workplace harassment. She's argued that she faced hostile treatment during production, but then also admitted in interviews that the set was supportive and collaborative. And Wayfarer's lawyers included those exact public statements to show the inconsistencies. They're reminding the court that the same person who described the production as safe and empowering is now saying it was toxic. And that kind of contradiction can destroy credibility fast, especially in a civil court where your own public words can be used against you. But the real stinger comes when they start quoting her own promotional interviews for the film, where she praised Justin Baldoni's direction and thanked the entire crew for making her feel respected, and heard that's in writing and it's on video. And Wayfarer is using it to argue that her story changed only after she lost creative control and faced negative reviews. And that's a narrative that hits deep because it reframes the entire lawsuit as a reaction, not a revelation. They're basically saying, this isn't about justice, it's about image. And that's the kind of thing that resonates not just legally, but in the court of public opinion too. And here's the thing that most people outside of Hollywood don't realize: these cases aren't just about facts. They're about perception. Judges and juries are human. And when they see someone trying to rewrite the timeline or twist the narrative, it raises questions, and Wayfarer knows that. So they're laying out the inconsistencies in plain language to make it impossible. To ignore the motion also dives into how Blake's claims about emotional distress don't match any objective evidence. She didn't take time off. She didn't file any formal workplace complaints at the time. She didn't even request mediation, which most contracts require before lawsuits. Instead, she waited more than a year after filming, ended to file suit right after the movie's marketing backlash began. And that timing is impossible to ignore because it creates the appearance that the lawsuit was reactive, not proactive. And that's exactly what Wayfarer's lawyers highlight in multiple places, saying her complaint appears to be a public relations maneuver disguised as a legal one. That line alone has been making waves among entertainment lawyers because it's rare for a filing to call out the other side's media tactics so directly. And it suggests that Wayfarer is preparing not just for the courtroom, but for the eventual appeal to the public eye, because once this ruling comes down, one side's reputation will never be the same. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because buried in this filing is something few people caught. Wayfarer explicitly points out that Blake's personal company, BL Inc., was the one who actually entered into the agreement to produce and star in the film, and not Blake herself. And that detail matters because legally that separates her from the employment relationship she's suing over. If her company was the one that signed the deal, then she wasn't technically an employee under the law, which means she can't sue for workplace retaliation or harassment in her personal capacity. And that one sentence could blow a hole through her entire case because it challenges her legal standing to even bring the claims in the first place. In other words, the court could rule that she sued the wrong party, and that would be game over. And the most shocking part is this isn't new information. It's been in the contract since day one. It's just that nobody expected Wayfarer to weaponize it this effectively. And if the judge agrees with them, that alone could wipe out half her claims before discovery even starts. This is the kind of twist that makes lawyers sit up, because it shows that the entire structure of her complaint might have been built on a misunderstanding of her own corporate setup. And while that sounds technical, it's actually devastating because it could mean she has no legal right to claim damages for things that only her company experienced. Not her personally. That's the kind of legal trap that can take months to unwind. And even if she tries to fix it with an amended complaint, the court might not allow it, since she's already had multiple chances to clarify her claims. So if the judge grants this motion on those grounds, that could effectively end most of the case instantly. But there's another layer to this, and it's pure drama, because buried deep in the exhibits attached to the motion is a declaration that hints at new evidence. Wayfarer claims they have text messages and production emails that show Blake was heavily involved in approving the scenes she later described as problematic, and that those scenes were approved not just by her, but by her creative team, and even by her agency. That kind of evidence, if true, could completely dismantle her narrative about being blindsided by creative decisions. It shows participation, not victimization. And that's exactly the kind of evidence that makes judges skeptical of emotional claims. And Wayfarer's lawyers know how to use that tone they're saying without saying that this isn't a harassment case, it's a creative control. Dispute dressed up as something else. And that subtle reframing could be deadly for her case. And then the filing drops a quiet bombshell that very few people noticed. It mentions that the New York Times article, which originally broke parts of her story, included excerpts from a confidential complaint that wasn't yet filed in court, meaning it had to come from her or someone on her team. And that's something courts take seriously because it raises ethical questions about leaking sealed information. And if that turns out to be true, it could not only hurt her credibility, it could open her side up to sanctions or even disciplinary review, because leaking sealed complaints is considered misconduct in some jurisdictions. So what started as a defamation-style battle could evolve into a credibility war, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Because once a judge starts doubting your integrity, everything else you say gets filtered through that doubt. And that's exactly the risk she's running right now. It's not just about the claims anymore. It's about the story behind them and who the judge believes is telling the truth. And in this round, it's clear that Wayfarer's legal team is controlling the narrative they've shifted, the entire frame from emotional outrage to legal precision. And that's a devastating shift because emotion gets attention, but precision wins cases. And as we move deeper into this motion, the tension becomes almost unbearable because what Wayfarer does next feels like a complete reversal of everything Blake Lively's team has spent months building. They start connecting dots between her media appearances, leaked text references, and legal filings in a way that paints a totally different picture of what happened behind the scenes. They argue that the so-called retaliation she described wasn't a reaction to her speaking up, but rather a coordinated PR backlash she initiated herself after the film's negative press, and they back it up with dates, headlines, and statements from her own representatives, which makes this part of the filing read less like a dry legal document and more like a timeline of cause and effect. The implication is stunning. They're saying she created a media crisis, then tried to sue over the response to that crisis. And if that sticks, it's devastating, because retaliation law requires that the action be taken against you for protected activity, not that you start a public feud and then call the fallout retaliation. So now the case isn't about mistreatment, it's about accountability. And that change in framing is everything. The motion even quotes emails where Blake's own publicity consultant refers to controlling the message after reviews came out, which Wayfarer subtly connects to the timing of her legal complaint. And what's more striking is how calmly they present it. They don't accuse, they demonstrate. And that restraint makes the entire thing more powerful, because it's clear they're letting the documents speak for themselves. And when you see the dates lined up, you start to realize how precise this attack really is. It's like watching a chess master force every move until the board closes in around you, and Blake's team seems to have no obvious countermove. The motion goes further, saying that several of her so-called leaked private communications that appeared in tabloids were actually attachments from her own filings, meaning the leaks could only have come from her side. And that's the kind of point that makes judges lose patience, because it suggests manipulation of the process. It suggests she's using the courtroom as a stage for a narrative instead of a forum for justice. And when Wayfarer says this, they frame it as a fairness issue. They're basically telling the judge that this case has turned into a media war that needs to be reset back to the law, and that's an appeal every judge wants to hear. Now here's the wildest part. The motion reveals that when Blake's team filed to seal certain text messages between her and Wayfarer executives, they did so after those same messages had already been referenced in a New York Times feature, meaning the content was already out there publicly. So by asking to seal them, she may have inadvertently signaled that those texts were authentic and damaging to her own claims. And that's what some lawyers online are calling the credibility trap, because she can't deny the messages without implying the Times fabricated them. But she also can't embrace them without undercutting her own narrative, so she's stuck in a corner. Either way, it's a lose-lose. And that's exactly what Wayfarer's team seems to have engineered. They've built the trap out of her own public contradictions, and now all they have to do is let the court see it. The motion even references social media activity, saying that within hours of certain leaks, Blake's official brand accounts were liking or reposting supportive comments about her version of events, which Wayfarer subtly uses to suggest coordination, not coincidence. And while that might sound like gossip in a legal filing, it actually matters because it shows intent. It shows control over how information spreads, and that makes it harder for her to claim ignorance about leaks or spin when she's visibly participating in the response. And once a judge sees that pattern, it becomes harder to view her as a passive victim. and easier to see her as an active participant in shaping the storm. And here's where this gets even darker, because in a single sentence buried, near the end of the section, Wayfarer's lawyers write that discovery has already shown evidence of pre-litigation media coordination, meaning they might already have proof that her team planned the public rollout before filing the complaint, if. That's true, this isn't just a case, it's a performance, a strategic use of legal filings to generate a public reaction, and that crosses a serious line in the eyes of the court, because the judiciary doesn't like being used as a stage for public relations battles. So if the judge agrees that this case was filed as a PR weapon, the court could impose sanctions or dismiss parts of it outright, and that would be catastrophic for her image, because it would prove everything critics have been saying about this being more about headlines than justice. And here's what's chilling. Wayfarer's team doesn't need to prove every single thing they're alleging right now. They just need to show enough inconsistencies for the judge to start doubting her claims. And once that seed of doubt is planted, it changes the entire tone of the courtroom. Suddenly, every emotional claim starts to sound rehearsed, every sealed motion starts to look suspicious, and every denial starts to feel like a strategy instead of a truth. And that shift is already happening. People close to the case have been whispering that the judge's patience might be wearing thin, especially after multiple filings from her side demanding secrecy over things that were already public, and this motion seems designed to push that impatience to the surface, to remind the court that Wayfarer has been cooperating while her team has been hiding and delaying. And if that's how the judge sees it, then the next hearing could be explosive, because it won't just be about the law, it'll be about who the judge believes is acting in good faith. And that's something you can't fix with spin. Now, what's fascinating about this part of the motion is how Wayfarer connects it back to the bigger Hollywood picture. They say this case risks setting a dangerous precedent where powerful actors can weaponize lawsuits to rewrite creative disagreements as legal claims, and that argument resonates, because the industry has seen it before, stars turning artistic disputes into legal threats when projects don't go their way, and that's exactly what Wayfarer is framing this as, a creative fallout turned into a legal spectacle. And that's a message judges understand. They want to discourage that kind of behavior. So if Wayfarer successfully sells this framing, the court might narrow the case dramatically, leaving only a sliver of her claims alive enough to technically keep it going, but too weak to win at trial. And that's when settlements happen quiet, behind-the-scenes walkaways, where one side gets to pretend it was never about losing. And that's what some insiders are predicting right now. They say Blake's lawyers might already be preparing for that exit strategy, because they know this motion is dangerous. It's not just a motion, it's a map showing exactly how her story can fall apart. And once that map exists, it can't be unseen. And while all this legal chaos unfolds, Hollywood itself is reacting. People in the industry are starting to distance themselves quietly. No public statements yet, but you can feel it. The silence, the lack of endorsements, the fact that people who used to rush to defend her are suddenly keeping their distance. It's the same pattern we've seen 100 times before when a star's narrative starts to crack, and studios don't want to be caught standing next to a sinking ship. And you can tell Wayfarer knows that, because their language reads almost like a signal to the rest of Hollywood. We're not the villains here, we're the ones playing by the rules. And that tone matters, because in this industry, perception becomes protection. And if this motion lands the way they hope it will, that protection could shift away from Blake Lively entirely. And now, as this battle reaches its boiling point, everything feels like it's teetering on the edge of collapse, because what started as a sweeping Hollywood scandal has transformed into a test of credibility, strategy, and power. Blake Lively's once unshakable narrative is under siege, not by tabloids or gossip, but by her own filings, her own timelines, and her own contradictions. And that's the most devastating twist of all, because no matter how emotional the story, no matter how compelling the headlines, when the facts start to clash, the story begins to crumble. Wayfarer's move wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, it was deliberate, methodical, and lethal. They turned the spotlight away from emotions and back onto evidence. And that's where the cracks began to show. Every sealed motion, every shifting claim, every carefully crafted interview now looks like part of a larger performance, one the court is no longer willing to entertain. And if this motion succeeds, it won't just end this case. It will reshape how Hollywood's elite handle their legal feuds forever. It will be a warning that even the most powerful names can't bend the law to fit their narrative, because in the end, the courtroom doesn't care about fame. It cares about truth. And right now, the truth seems to be leaning toward the side that stayed silent while the other screamed louder and louder. trying to control the storm. So as we wait for the judge's decision, one thing feels clear. This isn't just the fall of a lawsuit, it's the unraveling of a myth. A reminder that in Hollywood, reputation is fragile, and when the curtain finally drops, the audience always remembers who stood their ground and who played the role too long.